Thanks so much for joining us here on the Daily Racing Form YouTube channel. We have a preview for one of a few graded stakes races at Saratoga on Saturday. It's going to go as race number 10. It's the Grade 3 Prioress. And David, it is going to be one of a few at Saratoga. We have a couple over at Kentucky Downs. It's a big Saturday at Del Mar. We have graded stakes all over the place. And in this one, we'll have Too Sharp as your 7-5 morning line favorite, coming off of a big victory where she earned a 98 buyer speed figure, breaking her maiden on August the 2nd at Saratoga. So she's the horse they'll all have to beat in here.
Yeah, a lot of talented runners in action this weekend, and Too Sharp, one that might be flying under the radar for a lot of people right now. We'll see if that's still the case after this Prioress, because she does look like a horse that's coming into this race with a lot of potential.
And what makes her so difficult as we take a look at the Timeform US pace projector is she has big speed. She showed that in her most recent start when she won by 11 lengths and she was able to just clear off. She was down inside of a rival early and she kind of spurted clear a couple lengths. It's been a great meet for her trainer. And as we see with the pace projector, it's a race that favors front runners. It doesn't look like she'll have all that much company up front.
Yeah, I think the start is going to be critical for Too Sharp because she did blow the break on debut and then had to rush up thereafter to contest the pace before getting a little tired at the end. She was much more professional her second start, breaking more alertly. So I think hopefully she's gotten over that gait issue that we saw from her on debut. And if she is, she figures to be pretty tough to beat on the front end.
Yeah, maybe one or two in here with a little more intent horses like Carmelina, who you may not think want to be coming from off the pace a little bit. I could see them being more forward. Let's dive into this field and let's go horse by horse as we start from the rail with the number one. This was Musia, not Lucia, who we know produces some of the videos for us here, David. And this one is interesting because you have that 90 buyer speed figure in the stakes win on June 1st that kind of jumps off the page for her. And none of the other races have really come back to that. She actually beat Hall and Ice on June 1st. Hall and Ice came back to beat her, but she did have a little bit of trouble in that July 13th race. She'll get away from Gulfstream Park for the first time. What do you think about the rail runner in here?
Yeah, I don't envy Pete Ayala, who I think was trying out 3 different pronunciations of the same as I watched different replays for, I'm going to go with Muccia, the Italian pronunciation.
Yeah.
But her game face victory two-back was really impressive. She beat a nice runner that day in Hall and Ice, who obviously came back to turn the tables on her. It's just hard to know where that performance really came from a speed figure standpoint, looking back at her surrounding races. And you look in DRF Formulator at some of the runbacks from that game face, that 90 buyer is totally legitimate. Horses actually came back to improve their figures coming out of that race among those that she defeated. I agree. She didn't get the best trip last time. Not the case 3-back either. She looks like a horse that doesn't love racing inside of horses. So the number one post position concerns me a little bit for her.
Right next door, it's Autumn Evening, the number 2 in here. She's only raced 4 times. You can kind of go through her career. She hooked a maiden special weight group and was off for a bit of a layoff after that debut, then back-to-back victories. And her last start, she was behind 3 horses that are pretty nice horses. Mystic Lake's a multiple graded stakes winner, just won the Charlestown Oaks with a 95 buyer. The winner of that race, Emery, is 4 for 6 and was second in the grade 1 test next out with a 95 buyer. Even the third place finisher came back to win an off the turf stakes, Helena's Forte, with an 87 buyer. So maybe she faced just a little too tough a company last time out. This is another difficult group, but maybe she's a little better than her speed figures. What do you think about the 2 Autumn Evening?
Yeah, that victory ride has been a very live race, as you noted. And while she did finish last with 4 runners in there, she might have just been a little bit overmatched in that race. You could argue this is actually a slight class drop, even though she's just making a lateral move into another grade 3 event. She's a little tough to read off the trainer switch to Todd Pletcher. I was looking up some stats in Formulator over the past 5 years. First off a trainer switch, specifically in stakes races, Pletcher is just 2 for 29 with a 54-cent ROI on a $2 wager. So I thought that was a bit of a negative, but I agree. She's got some prior races that give her a small shot for a piece.
The New York bred Tricky Temper is up next. She has 10 career starts, and she's a 4-time winner. When I looked at her initially, David, I thought, okay, you know what? Her 4 wins are all versus New York breds, but the last couple of speed figures really do make her a player. And when you dive into the races when she was facing open company, she might have a couple excuses for some of those. Here's the most recent effort. I thought this was a pretty good performance. And, you know, she was able to show good speed, kind of take back, sit off a little bit. I could see her sitting a pretty good trip in here if there's any type of a pace battle that develops. And she's got some foundation. She's proven at Saratoga. You start diving back into her. I felt like there were a lot of things to like about her in here.
Yeah, when you start to go through her races, she seems like a horse that can make a good trip for herself. She did break a little bit slowly when she finished off the board in that allowance race three back. But aside from that, she gets really good stalking trips. That kind of trip is probably going to play very well in this race. I think the big question with her is, can she hold this form that she's been in while continuing to run back on short rest? Because this is now the, I think, fourth time in a row, or third time in a row, I should say, that she's coming back off a 2 week layoff. It's her fourth race in just 44 days. They're really trying to get a lot out of her while she appears to be in this strong spell of good form. I'm a little concerned that she might have a backwards move coming at some point. We'll see if that happens on Saturday, but her last race puts her right in the mix.
Yeah, with closing weekend, feels like a horse that loves Saratoga, trying to get one more race over that track if they can here with Tricky Temper. We move to Bell's Blue Bell, who tried the test last time out, was on a muddy seal track, was just probably in a little bit too tough that day. And you can just really tell when you look at her, David, she's just not a fan of an off track. So you can eliminate a couple of those races right away. She has 3 starts on and off track. Even when doing so, though, like her stakes win at Monmouth Park a couple starts back in the Merrifield, or any of her other races, they just don't seem quite fast enough. So she will need some improvement in here to keep up with some of the better ones.
We should notice at the time of we're recording this on Wednesday, there is rain predicted in the second half of this Saturday card at Saratoga. We'll see if that changes. But beyond her wet track record, Bell's Blue Bell just seems like a horse that needs to get a little bit faster, is a horse that wants to close him towards the back of the pack. I'm not sure that the race shape is going to favor her in this Prioress.
Carmelina is a multiple stakes winner who could at least make the speed in here too sharp have to work a little bit. She picked up her first victory this year after being a horse who was a little bit better last year. Speedy didn't seem like she was really taking the step forward. She does come off of a career best buyer. She does need the lead. She still will need to step up a little bit, but she could be a nuisance at least. She could have a say in this race if they handle her aggressively and they try to make Too Sharp work. But I just don't know if she's naturally as quick as Too Sharp.
They tried to put her on the Kentucky Oaks Trail earlier this year, and I think after that didn't work out and they turned her back to sprint races, trying to stretch out, it appeared to dull her speed a little bit because she wasn't able to get forward in those sprint races when she initially turned back in the spring of this year. She got her speed back last time at Colonial. I wish that she had beaten that field a bit more resoundingly because it seemed like she was just a little better than those horses. And now this is a step up in class. But I do agree, she's a horse that could be a little more forward than she's depicted on the pace projector.
Pacific Rose came in from Southern California over to Monmouth Park, and she moved into the Jorge Delgado barn. She has shown improvement in her 2 starts. She was 4th in a small stakes race on July the 26th. But again, I'm not going to knock her couple races for the new barn, but she will need to take another step up in here. You can see why some of the connections may have taken a swing in here, though, because it does sort of feel like you have Too Sharp as that top horse with that big speed figure that they're all kind of scared of. And then after her, there is a lot of questions with the rest of the field. And you have a horse like Pacific Rose, who is at least in fair form right now.
Yeah, she feels like a horse that could be one of the biggest prices on the tote board. And I think that she's a candidate to maybe pick up some pieces at the end because she wants to be closing at the end of her races. And I did not like the trip that she got last time in the Regret. She was legitimately 4 to 5 wide all the way around the turn. And then coming to the quarter pole, the jock finally decided to try to save some ground, but then angled in behind some tiring horses, lost momentum, had to alter course again. She might have won that race with a better trip or saving a little more ground. That still doesn't make her the winner of this race, but I think it makes her a little better than she looks in the Jorge Delgado barn. And I wonder if she's one that could pick up 3rd or 4th late in this race.
The horse to beat in here is Too Sharp. It's been a fantastic meeting for trainer Phil Bauer. And this filly, she was a little slow, as you mentioned, in her debut, and she rushed up. But then she came back on August the 2nd, and we have the replay of her win. And this was just a powerful performance. She had to put away another rival, but she did that kind of quickly. She cleared off, and then she just crushed. And, if she's able to just repeat something close to this, everybody else is here is going to be running for second. But what happens a lot of times, David, when you have horses early on in their career run a big race like this with a big speed figure, you always wonder how much it takes out of them. This is a horse who will be coming back in less than a month. So we're not necessarily even talking about 6 weeks or a lot of spacing in between. But as we saw there at the end of that race, it wasn't like she was asked to do a whole lot in the stretch. She was really geared down and still beating that field handily.
I'll be honest, I went into my handicapping of this race thinking that I was going to take a shot against Too Sharp because she just looks like the kind of horse that is going to get a little overbet in this race, coming off that big victory against lesser competition. Also, August 2nd was a day at Saratoga where I think the rail was a bit of an edge. It wasn't quite as strong of a rail bias as we saw the prior day on August 1st, but you still saw a lot of horses riding the inside path seem to have slightly enhanced performances, and I think that might have been the case with Too Sharp to some extent. But like you said, she still absolutely crushed that field. And the runner-up, Lady Pink, was a Chad Brown first-time starter that appeared to be working well into that race, beat the rest of the field by 8 lengths, and Too Sharp still demolished her by nearly a dozen lengths. So she's coming in here. The speed figure looks legitimate. She's worked really well out of this race. I looked up some stats for trainer Phil Bauer, who does very well coming off maiden victories on the dirt, especially when you just limit the sample size to the past 2 years when it feels like his barn has just been on fire consistently. So she's pretty tough to beat based on the likely trip and how talented she appears to be, but she's not going to be much price.
Lady Moscato has not been able to get back to the back-to-back victories that she had a little earlier this year, where she looked like she was really starting to improve. She breaks her maiden, and then she beats an allowance group by 8 lengths. She earns a nice 84 by her speed figure at the time, and then they throw her into some tougher races. 3 of the next 4 races, she faces Stakes Company, and in all of those races, she just has been a little bit overmatched. She's one that probably wants to sit back, make one late run in here, and pass some tiring horses. I could see her doing that. How do you think her chances stack up against this group?
If you want to say that she just didn't like the mile last time and turning back to 6 furlongs is better for her, I would agree with that. I still have trouble pointing to the sprint race in her past that makes me want to bet her in here. She's going to be a big price, but she doesn't have that much upside as such an experienced runner against horses that have had fewer chances, so she wasn't for me.
Just talked about Phil Bauer and the great meet that he's been having. How about John Ortiz and the meet that he has been having? He has Bright Work, who will make her first start as a 3-year-old. She was a really, really nice 2-year-old last year. She won her first 4 starts sprinting. Then as they stretched her out and they tried to go a little bit longer in the Alcibiades and the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, she just didn't want to go that far. But she's a grade 1 winner. She's a multiple graded stakes winner. We know she can fire fresh. She's proven at Saratoga, but this is a lot to ask for her, David. She did not start since November of her 2-year-old season, and we're already into the end of August of the 3-year-old season. So this feels like a race where she's going to really have to be on her A game if she gets the better of this group.
And some might remember she was actually entered in the grade 1 test earlier at this meet, made it all the way to the paddock, I think reared up and fell over, and that's a mandatory scratch in Naira when that occurs. So now they've had to kind of wait for the next race that she's eligible for on the circuit, which is the Prioress, 4 weeks later. So she's been ready to run for a while. I wouldn't worry too much about fitness. I'm just a little bit concerned about her overall ability because when you go back and look at even those sprint victories from last summer, the Adirondack and the Spinaway, while she did beat a very good horse in Ways and Means in the Spinaway, that runner came out of the race with an issue. So I'm not sure that it was a legitimate defeat of a horse as talented as that. And the other horses that participated in those 2 stakes races haven't exactly done too much since then. So I wonder about the quality of some of the fields that Bright Work was beating last year. She's got some things to prove in here, but the price could be fair.
As we get set to take a look at our selections, I encourage all of you to hit the subscribe button right there on our YouTube channel. That way you can get previews just like this for all the big races. There are 3 graded stakes races at Saratoga all in a row. This is the first of the 3 of them. David, how are you going to end up here in race number 10 with your selections?
I kind of reluctantly put Too Sharp on top. And what I'm saying when I do something like that, a horse that I think is going to be a little overbet, making them my top selection, is I just couldn't really latch on to anybody else that I thought was going to offer particular value in this race. I considered horses like the number 1 Mutia. I considered even the number 6 Pacific Rose, who's a crazy long shot, but they feel like more underneath types to me. And Too Sharp, just given the likely pace scenario and how much talent she showed last time, just feels like she's going to be pretty tough to defeat in this spot.
Yeah, my first glance, I kind of passed over Tricky Temper. And then when I was kind of looking for the horse you're talking about, I think I settled on Tricky Temper just because she has a more of a body of work and a foundation than a lot of these. And I feel like those races against Open Company, when you go through them, it might be a little sneaky. There was a slow start in one of them. She was second in a stakes in another, and then was in turf in another start. So I think she fits pretty well with this group. I'll give her a shot on top. 3792. Don't forget about the betting strategies that are also available for you. If you want to get more from David and how he's going to play the races on Saturday at Saratoga, you can check those out at shop.drf.com.